Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Art of Procurement. And as I mentioned a couple of times over the past couple of weeks or so, last week I attended the ISM 2016 conference in Indianapolis. And while I was at the show, I recorded a couple of interviews with leaders of the Institute of Supply Management. And my guest on the show today is one of those. It's Tom Derry. And Tom is the CEO of ISM. And this is actually the second time that Tom has joined me on the Art of Procurement. We talked over Skype back in episode 41, I think it was, as part of the Procurious Big Idea Week. And so it was great to meet Tom face-to-face in recording the show that I'm publishing today. And in our discussion, Tom and I talk about ISM 2016 itself, what it takes to plan and execute an event of this magnitude, because it was really a huge event. I think Tom talks about the fact that 2,500 people were there. Tom shared some of his key takeaways from the event, and we also discussed the future direction of ISM itself. And then in the second half of the discussion, I posed a series of questions to Tom in a quick-fire Q&A format that I really think that you'll enjoy, and he gives some really insightful answers. All right, before we go into the show, I did want to let you know that I recently published a new report called The 50 Lessons That I Learned from 50 Shows on the Art of Procurement. In the report, I do what the title says. I share the different lessons that I learned and the key quotes that I pulled from each one of the interviews that I've had over those first 50 episodes. So to get a copy of the report, it's free. All you need to do is just head on over to artofprocurement.com/50 lessons. That's artofprocurement.com/50 lessons. All right then. Well, with that being said, let's roll the tape on my interview with Tom. Hi everyone, and I want to welcome back onto the show Tom Derry, the CEO of ISM. And Tom, this is your second time joining me. First time face-to-face.
This is great to meet you face-to-face, finally. Yeah.
No, we're here. We had a few gremlins, I think, in our audio connection last time. So no excuses now that we've taken away technology, I hope.
I thought the last interview was brilliant.
Right. I loved doing the last interview. And we're here at ISM 2016. So ISM 2016 is the first time I've been to an ISM event. Honestly, you're putting on a great show.
Thank you.
With such a depth and breadth of kind of subject matter learnings. I think wherever you are in your career, there's something that you can learn from the events that are going on here. What does it take to put on an event like this?
Well, it's a year-long planning effort, first of all. As you can probably imagine, we have over 2,500 people here. The secret sauce for ISMs actually is what we call our conference leadership committee. Mm-hmm. So these are very seasoned practitioners. They're 15 years plus in the business. And you know what? They've built up a network. They know what the hot topics are. Right. They know who the best speakers are on those topics. Mm-hmm. And this year they did something that was really interesting because they decided, and it's by practitioners for practitioners, and we're just facilitating. They decided to set up the structure of the sessions in this sort of dialectic. Mm-hmm. It was do and don't, right? People and tools, risk and reward, direct, indirect. And I thought that was great. Yeah. It helps orient you. It's a very simple, straightforward label to get your mind oriented about what you're going to get from that session or series of sessions. And I particularly like their courage to organize a whole track around don't.
Right. Because you don't really see or hear much. It's all about the things you can do rather than the lessons that you learn from that you shouldn't be doing.
Right. And I don't know about you, but my most valuable lessons are from the mistakes I've made.
So within that framework then, how are you deciding the topics within that to focus on?
Well, some of them are perennial, right? Mm-hmm. And we know well. We get evaluation assessments back after every conference, and so we get very detailed, rich data on what was well received and what wasn't. And some of it just comes from the conversations we have, with thousands of our members throughout the year. We know kind of in a position to know what's top of mind.
Right. And what were people telling you this year was important in terms of topics to focus on?
Well, there's been a shift. For the most senior leaders, there clearly has been an embracing of a broader view of the role. Historically, as you well know, it was very much cost reduction focused. And no, people are being tasked with demonstrating how they're driving financial performance, how they are bringing in innovation into the business, how they're managing risk, how they're using sustainability to protect the brand, so that you're protecting your business with your consumer base. Right. So that was huge. I'm seeing, that's very senior level. And on the sort of mid-career folks, I just had a conversation with two lovely young ladies who are here. They're getting very practical advice around having a 5-year plan, whether or not to go for your MBA, how to find a mentor, the critical advice to get in that stage of your career.
Yeah, and often that's not available to you.
Right.
I struggled in terms of, at that time in my career, especially as most of us come into the career not necessarily thinking procurement's going to be for me, to know where to go. And I actually noticed there's a lot around emerging professionals here. Is that deliberate?
Oh, no question it is. By the way, the number of emerging professionals who are here, the conference has grown 166% in just 1 year. And that's intentional. We have some specific programs that are oriented towards them. But it's important for a couple of reasons. Yes, it's important for ISM to broaden our base, but as you probably know, just demographic trends mean that baby boomers like me are getting ready to leave the workforce or are leaving in massive numbers. The generation they call the millennial generation will constitute 75% of the workforce within 9 years now, and they have to be in a position to lead, and they haven't necessarily been in their jobs that long.
Right.
So they need somebody like ISM, or mentors and other resources to get them ready to lead. So that's why it's intentional.
In terms of how you evolve ISM itself, I think, is it 4 years you've been in the role now?
That's right.
Where do you see ISM going to over the next, let's say the next 10 or 20 years, kind of becoming different from what it is in the past to change as the world around us is changing? Yeah,
well, I think the mission will be consistent, so that's our North Star, and that's to advance the practice, right? But we say that we advance the practice both for individuals and their organizations, so that will probably be the same mission. But how we accomplish the mission is definitely going to change. So we're definitely a more digital organization today than we were when I first walked in the door. And that's because that's where people expect to consume information, right? Like this podcast.
Right, that's one of the motivators for setting up the podcast.
And that's where they've got time and availability. And if it's not the podcast on their phone, then it might be online learning on their phone.
Right.
So we've got an online learning platform that we debuted at this conference, for instance. All of that's integrated with our view of what the competencies and skills are that are required to be successful. So our certification, our mastery models, online learning platform all nest together. They fit together as puzzle pieces because it's part of this holistic view we have of what it takes to be successful. So the mission won't change, but the digital delivery will become more prominent. I mean, we'll always have this big annual event. Right? You can't network unless you're face-to-face.
You can exactly. The networking becomes almost a primary reason for the event, to bring all these people together to share their stories and ideas and actually meet with people that they only get a chance to meet with once, twice a year.
And for those young people, they're building their professional network, which will be that asset for them the rest of their careers. So it's so we'll have some of the traditional deliveries like this big annual conference, but more and more digital, I think.
So what are some of the key takeaways that you've taken from the event this year?
Well, there are many. We've had some interesting conversations. Alan Mullally was terrific. People really responded well to him. And his leadership strategy is very simple, but it's also very challenging. One of the key takeaways that I took from his message, because it's something that is a challenge for me as a person who leads an organization, one of his sort of management principles is make sure everyone knows the strategy and everyone knows the status against the strategy. Well, if I'm honest with myself, does everyone at ISM know the strategy? Well, probably not as well as I'd like them to. And does everyone know the status? Probably not as well. So if you can achieve that, and by the way, he had 200,000 employees at Ford. If you can achieve that on that scale, then what excuse do I have, really?
You come back to the office to work up some communication plans.
I think so.
One of the keynote from today, we're recording this on the third day of the conference, was talking about introverts and extroverts, and I certainly associate myself as being a strong introvert. We were talking before we rolled the mics about how that was a motivator for me in terms of doing what I do and setting up the podcast as a way to force myself to be more connected and to try and become more extroverted. Where do you identify yourself?
Well, I've done some behavioral assessments over the course of my career, and I think I fall in that ambivert category that Susan described. So they're introverts, extroverts, and there's this middle ground. But I'm more introverted than people typically assume, because they typically meet me when I'm in my public role, right? And being the public face of ISM. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as my sister would tell you, I do have a face made for radio and podcasts. So I kind of fall in that middle ground, but I've read about the number of CEOs who are introverts, who need the time to go away and think for themselves, process the information, and then come back. And she alluded to Jim Collins' great book, Good to Great, and what he describes as level 5 leaders in that book. That's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, management book. And that power of those leaders, because they build trust and confidence and believe passionately what they do, they don't have to be screamers to get the job done.
And that was interesting to me, and gave me hope as an introvert too, because the natural, as you say, you look at leaders and you think of them as being, they have to be extroverted to manage all that's going on within, and they're always kind of in that mode. But that's not necessarily the fact when you, behind the curtains, if you will, that you can be successful being an introvert. It's not a necessity. You're just challenging kind of your energy and your views in a different way.
And that was a great message. Just by the way, she didn't mention this in her talk, but one of the great introverts and most successful business leaders of all time is Bill Gates. Right. So, and he famously would go to the cabin in the woods for a week for his Think Week, right? And I think that's how he recharged his batteries. One of the powerful elements of her message was that, and she's done it herself, how we as introverts can just adapt and get more comfortable, whether it's navigating the after-work social event or a neighborhood cocktail party. As long as we find that time to get back and recharge our batteries, then we've got enough energy to go out and put ourselves out there. And it takes some of that to get ahead in the world. But what was great is that, you can do that. You probably don't change fundamentally who you are, but as we grow and develop, we acquire some skills that help us.
You can kind of work around it.
Yeah.
So I reached out to listeners of the Art of Procurement before I came into our interview today, and I asked some questions. What would listeners like me to ask, to pose to you? I have a few here, and I'm just going to I'll ask until we run out of time.
Great.
The first one is there was recently signed, I think it was only ratified a couple of weeks ago, the Paris Agreement. What impact do you think that climate change accords are going to have on the supply chain? And I guess a follow-up to that question is sustainability of supply chains finally becoming an imperative for businesses?
Well, on the latter question, there's no question in my mind that it is. On the first part of your question, some of the practical outcomes, companies are going to have to be concerned with their carbon footprint. Right? They're going to probably publish data. In fact, in the United States, you do publish data in your 10K and 10Q filings on your environmental sustainability program. So there will be more transparency around how green your business is, right? How green should your business be? And so that clearly will impact. And I know many, this is in the public domain. It's a well-known example for some people, but Coca-Cola figured out that its growth was going to come from emerging markets. It figured out that water is a scarce resource in those emerging markets. And then they went and looked at their manufacturing process and figured out it takes 3 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of Coke product.
Right.
And they said, we've got a problem. And they've been working on re-engineering the manufacturing process because they can't be seen as a net consumer of the scarcest resource in the economies they want to serve. So there's no question that climate change is going to fundamentally reorient how businesses actually do their business. Then in terms of sustainability, I think the key point there is how customers can punish companies. We see many examples of it. We know it's real. We know that customers will take their business, consumers will take their business elsewhere. I know that boards think about it. I know CEOs think about it. And interestingly, in the case of the procurement organization and the procurement leader, they're the organization who is most directly connected to all those external resources, right? That ecosystem that they manage and oversee. And that's where the board and the CEO is looking, Make sure that I don't get caught off guard, right, by some issue around forced labor in my supply chain, or unfair labor conditions, or unsustainable practices. And that's on the agenda of CPOs, no question about it.
And it's hard to get that transparency in your supply chain. It's where are CPOs that you talk starting?
Well, beyond the first tier, it's often very difficult to get visibility. But technology is a massive tool now that helps people. I know of one firm, it's actually in the financial space, that's trying to collect publicly available data to build a network of suppliers for a number of reasons. One is to understand where the choke points potentially are, right? If you've got one supplier of a critical component or part, and that supplier becomes unavailable for whatever reason, that's a serious problem for any business. And the financial community wants to understand where those choke points are. But the same technology could be used for visibility in other aspects of the supply base. So I think technology is going to help us.
It'll be an enabler.
Yeah, get there.
The next question is around kind of a similar topic. It was from a listener in the UK, but I think it can apply to legislation around the world. The question was, how will the UK's Modern Slavery Act and similar supply chain transparency acts across the world affect supply chain management?
Well, there's no question they'll have a profound impact. In the United States, the only equivalent we have today is a similar law in the state of California. But it would not surprise me that similar legislation would gain traction in the U.S. Congress over time. I know there's a lot of interest among legislators here in the United States. And it's going to, just like the Dodd-Frank law in the United States forced companies to understand where their conflict minerals were being sourced, right? It's now absolutely the case that a little corner of the business that wasn't used to outside scrutiny and regulation is now going to be more and more subject to outside scrutiny and having to comply with regulation.
And I'm guessing as more and more companies get found out, and maybe found out's a strong word because in some cases they don't even know that this is happening, but as it gets more attention, it will force companies to have to invest more in managing and protecting against this. Because they need to protect their brand.
They have to. But there's an interesting twist on that. So it could be that you're forced to absorb more cost that you may or may not be able to pass on to your customers. But the other twist is a company like Patagonia in the United States. So their customer base is all about adventure travel and stewardship of the environment, and why would someone pay $30 for a T-shirt from Patagonia when you can get one for $4 from Target, right? Nobody in procurement would do that.
It does the same thing. Keeps you warm.
So, the answer is they use a process because typically processing cotton generates a lot of byproduct and waste that's very toxic for the environment. They've developed a process that avoids some of that byproduct and waste, but is more expensive. But the shift is that their customers are willing to pay for the more expensive T-shirt because they align their values with that process.
So it gives it a brand premium.
Yeah. And so it would not at all surprise me that we see, and by the way, from the research I read, a lot of consumer tastes are shifting towards what we call more authentic brands. Less of the typical well-known mass appeal brands,
or whatever.
brands. And so those trends sort of create some niche opportunities for business and not so niche opportunities for business to command premium prices.
Right. So the next question is something that you'll see a lot of, and I'm sure you have an opinion one way or the other on, just because of the volume of training and education that you do at ISM. Is there a talent deficit in procurement?
Well, I would say yes, but I would say because we're in the midst of a transition, and the skills that are being required now to be successful aren't the skills that made a person successful even 5 years ago. And so we're in this period of time where people who are still in the profession are learning new things and have to learn them rapidly. Meanwhile, we have an influx of great talent into the profession. I don't think it's true that procurement is unable to attract the best and the brightest. I see examples all the time of the best and the brightest going into procurement by choice. So I think the talent deficit is this temporary kind of phenomenon where we're transitioning to a higher level of performance.
Yeah. So there's not necessarily a vacuum, but it's just it takes time to get the volume of the skills that we need to push the profession as a whole. There's pockets of organizations who are doing it because they have that access to the talent right now. It's just going to take time for that to be available to others.
Right, so that level is more or less common across
Right.
the entire function and across many companies. I think that's true. I think you've got people who are ahead of the game and have recognized it early, and people are just now catching on, and so
Right.
they've got some work to do.
My last question, we're coming up against time here, is something that I've always felt that in procurement, we treat information like power. And maybe that's just the way. It could be industry specific. I was brought up in the manufacturing environment before I moved on to other industries, and we were taught, to keep our cards close to our chest, not give up information, and that's both to our peers, to our suppliers, to our constituents. That's changing because technology, access to data, that's bringing transparency. So what impact that's going to have, and as a professional, how should I adapt? Should I recognize the fact that I can't operate in this world where I have to keep things close to my chest?
I think that's absolutely the case. I think that that traditional way of thinking, of playing your cards close to your chest, comes from a fundamental mindset of it's a zero-sum game.
Yes.
And your win comes at my expense, or my win comes at your expense. And that's just not how we're building value in businesses today. Even Alan Mullally mentioned yesterday, what did he call it? PGA, profitable growth for all?
Yeah. When he was talking about when the big three were in trouble.
Yeah.
And not, we're all in this together. You can't ostracize your competition when they're struggling because the industry needs everybody.
And where would Ford be if it got to its profit target at the expense of its suppliers? Right, without a supply base,
the supplies would go.
Yeah, it's a short-term strategy to get ahead, but it's not a long-term strategy for value creation. Yeah. So I think people recognize that. I think we're moving to this new paradigm where collaboration genuinely means we're creating value for everyone, and that rising tide is floating all boats. Right. I just deeply believe that.
Great. Well, we're coming against time today, so Tom, thank you very much for participating again.
Such a pleasure.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. It was actually great to be able to do this face-to-face this time.
Well, let's do it again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm going to link up to the show notes for today's episode at artofprocurement.com/ISM 2016. That's artofprocurement.com/ISM 2016. Tom, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.